I must first teach you how to learn.
Often than not, the number one theme is global censorship of news and information. Many people will look at the collapse of the dinosaur media and the collapse of its credibility as something positive, and I do overall, but really now, what do they have to lose? They have only intensified and then intensified again and then intensified again and again and again the unification of deception and twisting information.
Because they're not even aware of the fact that this body has vorticular chakric wheels moving through it that are actually bringing in, porting to different layers of the fabric of space-time, that there's geometric structures going on in this body, meridian lines, there's the capacity to tap the 0-point field, build up charge and chi, and release it. There's the capacity to travel with this conscious field outside of this body and come back into this body. These are all technologies that we have.
They found gold mines older than around 40,000 years in South Africa. Pyramid with the shining eye. Even Jim used it for his new bestseller. So it means it is a very, very famous but also very, very old symbol. And this is the only existing really pyramid with the eye. It has exactly 13 steps, like the pyramid on the $1. And very strange, our exhibition where I showed this pyramid in original in Vienna, the opening was on 21st of June 2001. And this crop circle appeared in Eastfield in England on the 21st of June 2001. And the next circle, the pyramid with the eye, was showing on 21st of July 2002 in Beacon Hill. It's the pyramid with the eye and the 33 lines. Other artifacts found in Ecuador that if you put black light on it, the eye shines really very, very strong. And the natural color is kind of light green and gray. And the most impressive for me was that on the bottom of the pyramid, you have here in gold inlays the Orion constellation and an unknown writing. This unknown writing we found on stones all over the world. In Ecuador, in Colombia, in Illinois, in Gloucester, France, in Calabria, Italy, in Turkmenistan, in Malta, and Rex Gilroy has some pictures on his website, and I found out that some of the stones he shows with unknown writing presents the same writing. That means there must have existed a global civilization long, long time ago. And there was only one man able to translate this language, Professor Kurt Schildmann. He was the president of the German Linguistic Association. He spoke and wrote more than 40 languages perfect. And he could translate this writing, and he called it pre-Sanskrit, because it's older than the oldest writing. And the translation of these 4 letters on the bottom of the pyramid was "The Son of the Creator comes." And when an American professor with his Tuareg friend from Northern Africa, Tuareg, was watching this picture on Project Camelot interview, he was contacting me. And he was informing me that his Tuareg friend was shocked when he saw this writing, because he said it looks like our former writing, and one sentence he could translate, that was son. And the Tuaregs are on the research of Professor Marcel Homais. He was a famous French archaeologist, and he was writing a book, and he was writing that the Tuaregs, on his research, had a connection to the sunken continent Atlantis. And he was a great researcher. He invited me to a 3-day meeting with 15 elders of the big North American tribes. And the 3-day meeting was about giants and little people. Until this meeting, I had never any experience or data or facts about giants and little people. But after that meeting, it really started, and I was very much shocked about some of the findings. Stories or legends about giants. The one before the last one on the left side is about 7.60 meters. I got the information that Father Carlos Crespi in 1962 was called by people from Ecuador from a mountainside because a heavy storm brought down a part of a platform, and they found a lot of destroyed bones. And as they didn't know what kind of bones these are, they called Father Carlos Vaca, who was working in a hospital, and he recognized that these bones are from a human. But he also found out that this skeleton must have been the size of 7.6 meters. In Switzerland, we did a model of a 7.6 meter skeleton, which you can see part of it here, and you can see that the big man even didn't reach the knee of this skeleton. A graphic of the South African petrified stone footprint, and we did a measurement of a normal man foot size of 1.7 meter. He would have a shoe size of number 41, and on the other side you see this guy's shoe size 177, and we measured out that he might have had 1.6 ton of weight. Found in a coal mine in U.S.A. The coal in this area is around 68 million years by geologists, and you can see a petrified skull in the stone, which is also much bigger than a model of a human skull seen on the. And he heard about the story of Shambhala and underground world. And once he was friend with them, they told him about the Samadhi caves. So he asked what Samadhi means. And they explained him that in this Samadhi caves, there are human from normal size up to 10 meters in the lotus seat. The body has zero function, but they are not dead. They explained that these people are connected with a silver string with the universe. And on his last trip, he got the allowance to go into one of these Samadhi caves. He was not allowed to bring light, he was not allowed to bring a camera, but he has to take care 1 week, nothing to eat, just meditation, and then he could go inside. And he could go so far that he could see the silhouettes of humans in real different size, up to 10 meters. But then he got headache, and they explained him that usually if a normal person tries to go into one of these caves, he will get immediately a headache, getting strong and stronger, and finally he dies, because these caves are energetically protected. Human hand print also in a petrified, and also the age dating should be over 50-60 million years. Hand, and on the right side a human foot. We did a lot of researches on this piece, also in the United States was done a lot of researches, and the result was that this is a human hand and a human foot, fossiled in a stone plate, and geological dating of this stone from the area of Via de Leyva is about 120 to 140 million distinct pieces I ever saw. And I could present those pieces also found in Colombia close to Bogota, in the area where the Muiscas lived. And the Colombian archaeologists did research on the pieces, and they pointed all these pieces out as new done artifacts. And for me the most interesting and funny story is, when we got these pieces to Vienna, I had the allowance from Professor Gutierrez, and he was with me. We went to the Natural Historical Museum in Vienna, to the Mineralogical Institution, and they did a perfect result on the material. And the material of this one and the following artifacts is lyddite. Lyddite is a very hard stone. It has the hardness nearly like granite, but the problem is that this stone structure is like leaves. So we did the material check first, and then I asked Dr. Distelberger, who is known in the world of museums worldwide as the expert on stone and precious stone work, and he checked those pieces, especially this one. We call it genetical disc. And after checking all the pieces, he told me, I cannot tell you how they did these pieces. I cannot tell you when they made these pieces. And of course, I cannot tell you who made those pieces. But the only thing I can tell you, we are not able today to make the same pieces from the same material. So Professor...
Who was contracted by the government over several years, and he visited crash sites and interrogated alien life. And anyhow, these are his notes and his diary and his information. And there are links to posts that I've done before. And as I said in the past, you can watch any one of these. You don't have to see the other to watch the parts. The parts are, fair to a point that it's possible that we have alien life. And I believe he knows the answer to that question, but he can't reveal it. And one way that it is being revealed is through the Dulce base. Now I'm going to just dive right into this. So here we go. The following material comes from people who know the Dulce underground base exists. So the scientist is saying he's gathered this. They do research on the effects of radiation and human genetics, if you will. But there is a second reason for the base, and it also includes other intelligent species as well, which is alien biological life form entities. So it's the workings with the aliens. That's number two, or the second purpose, for the Dulce base. So there's two. Number one, they study the effects of radiation. Number two, they study alien biological life form entities and things like that. But here is the machine. This is your subterranean that is being used to build these underground bases that house some of sidewalk, lakes, electrical cars, buildings, and even shopping malls underneath. And they said some are built on the moon and on Mars. That's, what he's seen over the years. All right, it's around there, and basically there are more than 7 levels, and most of the aliens are in level 5, 6, and 7. But let's move on, talk about some of the research that's going on within the Dulce base itself. And he says, now remember, this was written years ago and then taken down and reprinted or re-released. U.S. Energy Secretary John Harrington, this man right here, as you can see, he was in office during that time. Okay. Let's go back. Okay. He named this laboratory and the Los Alamitos Laboratory a place to house advanced genetic research centers as part of the project to decipher the human genome. Basically, the research has been going on at the Dulce lab, and a lot of people refer to this as the nightmare hall because of all the crazy experiments that they have seen going on. And here is a bizarre experiment given by, a witness, somebody who worked there, reports from workers. I have seen multi-legged humans that look like half human and half octopus. Also reptilian humans and furry creatures that have hands like humans and cry like a baby. It mimics human words, and also huge mixture of lizard humans in cages. Now these are eyewitnesses of the events and things that went on. There are fish, seals, birds, and mice that can barely be considered these species. There are several cages and vast of winged humanoids, grotesque bat-like creatures about 3.5 to 7 feet tall, gargoyle-like beings, and dracoid reptilians. Now they're messing with mingling the alien Nephilim DNA with animals, with humans, and things like that. That's why these accounts are so shocking. In level 7, they say it's worse, row after row of humanoids, perhaps in the thousands. There's embryos stored there, vast of humanoids. And here's another account from level 7. I frequently encountered humans in cages, usually dazed or drugged, but sometimes they cried and begged for help. We were told they were hopelessly insane. Now, before I continue, the government has had projects where they take the mentally insane and do experiments on them, so it backs up this as well. But anyway, and they are involved in high-risk drug tests to cure insanity, so they're told. At the beginning, we're told not to speak to them, and at the end, we believe them, and that's because they drug them with so many things. Finally, in 1978, a small group of workers discovered the truth, and I believe this is Philip Schneider's story, but it began with the Dulce Wars, and a secret resistant unit was formed. Now, he says there are over 18,000 aliens at the Dulce complex, and in 1978, 79, if you will, there was actually a confrontation over weapons, and a lot of scientists and military personnel were killed, and he's going to get into that in just a moment. But just human were killed, and down here, 132 aliens were dead. This is what happened during that war again. Now, right, the area around Dulce has had a high number of reported animal mutilations. This is what they're experiencing in this little town. Government and aliens use the animals for environmental tests, psychological warfare on people, and etc. In the say New Mexico, NM, New Mexico is high on missing children's list. So anyway, and particularly Dulce I'm at, and I thought, wow, this is rather simulation experiments at the Dulce base. He also goes on to say that there is some of the studies for mind control implants going on at the base. So it's the two-part, but it's also this third part. And it talks about ELF devices capable of mood, sleep, and heartbeat control. As you know, some of that has recently come out. And then it talks about how DARPA, if you don't know what DARPA is, just Google it, is highly involved in that, along with the Jason Group, who is basically linked to the Illuminati, alien research. And here's some of that research, as well as they kind of, monitor behavior control and what they can do, or they're studying how they can reprogram the brain, telepathic stuff. This is all things going on at the base. And he also admits that they have bases off the coast of Florida and Peru, underwater bases of where they do, alien research.
Ricardo, these creatures are very, very strange. They're anomalous. I don't know really what I'm looking at. But you have done DNA testing on this creature and this creature. Tell us what you found.
This DNA sequence was made from 5 different molecular biology laboratories in several parts of the world. And the common results has the DNA is very similar to DNA from humans in 98.5% similarity. It's very...
I could do better. And I had read about the Eastern, in Tibet, the acoustical levitation they used to use to move giant rocks up and down the sides of mountains. And so I knew that sound and magnetics are really one and the same. They're just different frequencies away. It's the same with light, the same with color. Everything is in frequencies. Everything is everything without exception. Because it's all one. It's all one thing. And it's dissected as you use it. This is made out of a high polished aluminum. That's all it was aluminum. And you could touch the periphery, you could touch anything on the craft, and it was pretty solid. But as they increased the frequencies, it's similar to the ping pong ball experiment, only this is different. This was in a little slightly different dimension than that. They started increasing the frequencies that this craft was vibrating on. It had so many cycles per second that it was operating on in this dimension. So as you increase that frequency, you start getting into resonance with its surroundings. And I kept touching this thing, and then pretty soon I noticed that it was getting softer and softer. And then pretty soon I put my fingers right through the shell of this craft here, right into the side of it, which blew me out of the water. And Carr says, come on, come on, come on. He knew this, he knew all about it. And he knew this is quite simple to understand, that once you reach a resonant frequency of anything, then you're free of the confines of the environment, of any environment, no matter what it is. And like the bumblebee, a little further. And so we increased the frequency like a fan blade. You know, the faster it goes, it starts disappearing. It starts getting fuzzier and fuzzier. Well, this thing right before our very eyes started getting fuzzy. And pretty soon, it was gone. Completely gone. And Carr at that moment said, well, I'm not sure it's still here. And it's in another frame of reference. That we may have sent it somewhere. It might show up on somebody's table. So that was my experience, my first experience with what's known as teleportation, quite a bit. And when you use your mind, you realize that anything below that is illusion, that we're creating it. And we create it through the brain, if you will, in the third dimension, by these little cameras that are flickering microseconds, milliseconds, and creating all these things that we give names to: lights, chairs, tables, people, and we say, well, no, this is solid. Well, it is. Everything is true. There is nothing but truth. There's nothing in the universe outside of truth. It's how we look at it. Frames of reference. Clear blue sky, and you see clouds formulate, and then you see them turning dark, and da-da-da-da-da. They're accumulating moisture right out of the air, just like an air well, and they're bringing hundreds, thousands, millions of tons. Water weighs 8 point something per gallon, 8 pounds per gallon. Millions of tons are suspended right over our heads, and then when nature gives a signal, it rains. But that's how simple levitation is. It's a balance. That's all it is. And when you understand the mechanics of magnetics, it's quite simple to levitate anything. General Motors, a motor company that makes General Motors cars, to meet in Riverside at one of the hotels, we said, we want to take your wheel that's going this way on the ground, ruining the ground and grinding up animals and putting pavement everywhere. And we want to turn it sideways. We want the wheel to go from this to this and up. And we can do it. We'll show you. We can take your cars and we can levitate them for the start. And then we'll show you how to go further than that. And eventually, which gets into my department, we could have floating homes, gardens, everything on board. and everybody would have for life, their own home, and then cities, and then countries. Well, this guy didn't want to hear this. He looked, we gave him a demonstration, and we levitated a small prototype, and he said, no, he said, the monetary system, back to Morgan's idea, there's no money in that. You know, you're gonna ruin everything if you do that. You can't have that. We're making plenty of money with cars, and we'll make plenty more. And so Otis, he's a very humble man, very much a gentleman, and very, very kind to everybody he ever met. And he excused himself and said, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. If it's of interest to you, it will help me. My website is, what is my website? Okay, it's Vortex, spelled with a V, like Victor, VORTEXXX, followed by the numeral 3 at AOL.com. And my name is Ralph Ring, and I'm available 24/7 if you've got any questions or anything that will help us, all of us, get these things off the ground. I know how to do it. In my heart, I've been there and done that. I know what teleportation is. I know who and what we are. We're immaculate, immortal beings, and we don't have to live under servitude anymore. We can just do whatever we want. Now, I'm sorry, I got sidetracked again. Came into Apple Valley, into our laboratory. There was about 7 or 8 truckloads of these people, and some of them had badges with FBI, some of them had all kinds of credentials, and some of them had weapons. They said, we're shutting you down, we're confiscating everything, we're taking your craft. We found out later it is, to this day, in Los Alamos, New Mexico, 9 stories down underground. The OTCX-1 that I flew in is 9 feet, 9 stories down. They shut us down completely and said we were attempting to overthrow the monetary system of the United States, and we'd have to stop.
What, 40 years or something? And we have seen Ralph come really back from close to being dead, and he's looking fabulous, and we're actually, you know, thrilled to death. He's a wonderful teacher, and he did meet with General Motors, and they did say to him, if you put him up, we'll shoot him down. This was also something
like in physics, and they talk about this with quantum systems, is that you get to a certain critical mass of coherence, like in superfluidity and helium, and like when 1% of those molecules or atoms of helium are aligned and become coherent, instantly all of them do. And it becomes what's called superfluidity. And so you have this phase transition, it's called in physics. And so that can happen also with people. And as Rupert Sheldrake pointed out, you know, in the whole concept of morphogenic fields, it's sort of like the 100th monkey effect, where a certain population learns something, and then when it reaches that critical mass, suddenly monkeys on other islands and in other areas that had no linear contact start automatically know how to do it also. So there's this non-locality of learning in large social systems, and they've proven this with monkeys and primates and also with humans. So all I can say is that if all of us do what we should be doing, we'll hopefully reach that phase transition and move over to this other way of functioning, politics, but also more easily, as this one Air Force witness told me, he says, the real way this has been kept secret is just sheer ridicule. The subject, you know, you really don't have to do or say anything. It hides itself because people don't want to be laughed at. People don't want to be put down by their peers. People don't want to be lose esteem. Is that he told me the ETs wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow disclosure to happen. I said, excuse me, we're making contact, and it's clear that, you know. He said, well, let me tell you what happened. So he was involved with a lot of UN programs and also with George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush, and a man at the UN named Pérez de Cuellar, who was the Secretary General at the time. I had done briefings with the predecessor, with the one after Boutros Boutros-Ghali. And he said to me, the reason I, on the phone, told you that it wouldn't be allowed isn't that it wouldn't be allowed from the point of view of the government, but the aliens won't allow it. I said, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, since we've been talking, we've gone down to Mexico, had craft come out. I said, they're obviously wanting to make contact if we do it in a peaceful way and not a military way. He says, well, this was attempted before you started your organization. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, in November of 1989, in the fall of 1989, President Ronald Reagan, Mikhail Gorbachev, Pérez de Cuellar, and himself, this guy, and others met on a committee, very sensitive and classified, to organize basically what I did with the Disclosure Project, to announce that we weren't alone and end the secrecy. From a 3 a.m. late night planning session for this event, when he was abducted by aliens from his motorcade in Manhattan. And I said, oh, really? And he proceeded to tell me the gory details of what happened. So Pérez de Cuellar was taken somehow out of the motorcade onto an ET craft where he was threatened by the ETs and told, if you disclose this information, we will abduct every world leader involved, including the President of the United States. Now, this is from a person who was at the table for this planning session. To my ears, now to you. And I went, oh, come on, really? And he said, yeah, it blew up like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House. Subsequently, I found out that at the Kennebunkport, there were all these UFOs zipping around when Bush was up there out on his cigarette boat. And they didn't realize they were ours. So now we're getting into false flag 101. The Roswell event, there was a red-headed sergeant who was the badass guy who threatened to kill everyone, all those ranchers who saw this thing crash. His son became a part of Magic Security, this renegade group, this splinter group, who was involved with abductions and stopping leaks within Magic itself. He then went and was in the security detail that night and set up the electronics for this electronic warfare abduction of aliens. It was all a hoax. It wasn't ET at all. It was 100% military ops. And so when thought it was actually ET. And it blew up, as I said, like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House. Gorbachev, they pulled the plug on the plans to do disclosure and end secrecy in 1989 at the end of the Cold War. And I think it's strange that in January of 90, 2 months later, there are technologies that would facilitate this kind of deception. And the military term, so you know it, is a false INW, or a deceptive INW, indication and warning. And it's basically like the Gulf of Tonkin event in Vietnam. You basically exaggerate or hoax an event that then manipulates policymakers. So this was the ultimate takedown of official disclosure, which was about to happen in 1989. That is that there is an overarching agenda that was hatched in the 50s. Remember that psychological warfare document and its value? That was hatched in between 53 and 56 to create the specter of a threat from outer space that does not exist. Wernher von Braun stated on his deathbed, and we have the testimony of his assistant, that and said, they will first have the Cold War, then we decided there would be nations of concern, then global terrorism. We have this testimony from before 9/11. Then that would be followed by threats from outer space. They'll start talking about asteroids and things of this sort, but the ultimate one they're going to play is the alien threat, and it's all a lie, and it's all a hoax. But in order for the lie to work, they have had to create a body of disinformation, false information, and frightening scenarios, and actual events that would be convincing to our policymakers like Reagan, convincing to the average person, and to the UFO public that consumes videos, entertainment consoles, movies, etc. Stuff that they are simulating and saying that the ETs are doing through these abduction scenarios, it is 100% being done by military special operations that are this paramilitary force. And this is the deep end of the pond. Now, when I discovered this back in 1994, now this is 21 years on, I was told by someone in the intelligence community, don't talk about that, because that's what's really dangerous for you. And it's also what will discredit you, and it will also cause them to hate you the most, because you're defanging their whole war plan. The next big war is not terrorism, it's interstellar. And if you expose that it's a hoax, it takes all the steam out of their plan. I said, yes, but if we don't, we're cooked, because there's no way you can have war that's interstellar and survive it. It'd be worse than mutual assured destruction, because the technologies are 1,000 times worse than a hydrogen bomb. It had over 600,000 views. The next day, the intelligence community went in and said there were 6,000 views. By the way, if you believe the metrics on Google and YouTube, I have a bridge to sell you. It's all can be manipulated because it moves you down the search engines. So when this hit, within a couple of days, had 600,000 views. This man, William Pollock, his name is pronounced Powlick, was a man, very good man, who gave me an interview only to be released posthumously after he died. And not long, a few years ago, I got a letter from his wife, significant other, I guess, they weren't technical. And I have a lot of these, you know, and I honor my word about keeping a confidence. So what happened is that he gave me this interview, and in it, he talks about the development of RF radio frequency chip implants back in the 70s and 80s. And this, when he was developed, it was totally an accidental thing that happened. He was with a company that developed it. He then got called into the CIA, and they started doing special programs for the CIA to develop it. And at a certain point, Siemens in Silicon Valley manufactured 2 billion of them, with a B, of these RF chips. And the way they work, I mean, they can be so miniaturized, you can eat something with it, it has a radio and it can transmit not only where you are, but the really advanced ones have a neurophone capability to control thought and behavior. Very sinister stuff. One of the plants is on the edge of the Area 51. They're the ones manufacturing the implants that you're taking out of these abduction victims. Absolutely. They're not coming from outer space. They don't need that. If you're interstellar, you're transdimensional. If you're transdimensional, you don't need an RF frequency plant chip to track anybody, because their technologies are way beyond that. I said, this is human, 100%. And you better wake up. Death had developed an electronic system in 1956, or 54, that would enable someone electronically to remote view anywhere. And could also affect, some of these have been called radionic psychotronic weapon systems. And they were developed decades ago. Now, how hard is it to deploy them? Not hard. They're not used every day. They're used enough to create a groundswell of conviction that there's an alien threat. So you take that capability, combine it with man-made UFOs, combine it with disinformation in general about the subject, and also certain chemicals, and you can launch an entire contagion of fear that's based on completely man-made false events. So this is the false flag event I wanted to warn you about. And people say, when is that going to happen? I said, it's happened already. It's already happened. the media, the film industry, any UFO conference you go to, is going to be filled unwittingly, usually, not always unwittingly, but usually with information that is this kind of disinformation designed to create an us versus them dynamic of an alien threat. Netta, the CIA director and then Secretary of Defense, but when he was CIA director, said, you know, we're spending $110 billion a year chasing down 70 Al-Qaeda members in Afghanistan. Ridiculous. Heads up, Werner von Braun on his deathbed warned that this would happen and it would be hoaxed. We've had so many people. I have met with one man, I can't get him to come forward, and then another, and then another, and then another, who spoke of, in the early days, they had used, I know this sounds terrible, but he was a little guy, and he was so short, and they basically did like you would in a movie, suit and head and mat to make him look like an alien. And there would be military choppers nearby, but he would be on one of these flying discs, man-made, and go in and with a chemical canister and some electronics, abduct people. And he says, oh yeah, I was on an abduction squad. It was way back, I think in the 60s. They've gotten better, and I say better, and they've become more efficient because over the decades they've developed little creatures that look like an ET. They may look gray or like a reptile or this, and they kind of walk like this. They have this robotic, weird walk, and if you look at I saw the video that Stan Romanek had of the one that came into his house, that basically a film company bought up in Black Shell. Nobody has seen this. I was at his home. And the one that came into his house was exactly one of these so-called gray-like creatures. And the way it moved was this very robotic. It was so obvious that it was a biomachine. And if you go into the brain, it is physical. It has a biological component, but it's laced, the neural cortex is laced with integrated circuits. And it's completely under control of these military operatives. But he thought it was an alien. Sorry, if you're interstellar, you are transdimensional. But what does that mean? It means that your communication gear, as well as your transportation gear, is dropping out of linear space-time in a non-locality, a field of non-locality. Now, the ultimate field of non-locality is pure mind stuff, the essence of awareness. But that's absolute non-locality. But between the absolute field of non-local, pure, undifferentiated consciousness and 3D are countless numbers of gradations of relative non-locality. And they may not be instant, but they're pretty damn fast, and they're certainly faster than the speed of light. Is this making sense to people? Okay, stay with me. So this means that they have electronic devices that are, when they're fully materialized 3D, have electronics that can pick up on directed thought and transmit directed thought. And I'll never forget Dr. Robert Woods, who is one of our witnesses from McDonnell Douglas, telling me a story, old man McDonald. I know this from two sources, Lawrence Rockefeller, who was very interested in all this, and who funded the original Project Starlight effort. The AP had this whole release of Project Starlight documents from the Clinton Library. It was a big scandal a couple years ago. And we were putting all this stuff together, and Lawrence Rockefeller was involved, and his lawyer, Henry Diamond, and all these big folks, and I was putting together all this stuff. He funded the first gathering of witnesses at Silomar near Monterey in California in 1995. We had KGB people there, and cosmonauts and astronauts and everybody. And what was interesting is that this whole group of people kind of understood this area of thought and consciousness, but not too technically. And what we discovered was that through going back, this was I believe in the mid-60s, McDonnell Douglas was very interested in this, and old man McDonald himself was like, oh, I've got to know about this. So Dr. Woods, who is a very renowned aerospace guy, was sent to research all this stuff. Anti-gravity, UFO sightings, all this stuff. And he came back with this amazing case of a very high caliber case, where I think it was in the Baja California, where a craft had materialized, and this was back before we had systems to track them so well and hit them with electromagnetic weapons, which is what's happening today. We'll get to that. And this little being came out, and it had like a little black box thing here. And it was obviously the communication device. And the people who had the encounter said that basically the ET was communicating directly into their neural cortex, and maybe auditory cortex, with this thing in thought. And that when they would think back to the being, they wouldn't have to speak, he would understand it and receive it. And so it was a, if you will, a thought transponder instead of a radio transponder. Both telescopes and the SETI project spending hundreds of millions of dollars. You can go to Radio Shack, get a radar detector, a magnetic field meter, tri-field meter, and a couple other things, put it out, sit in meditative state, and then welcome them to come, and all kinds of things can start happening. And what is it? How do you interpret that, though? It becomes very intuitive. Because, and what we have found with some of our equipment, certain things will make certain tones. Like we have one radar detector we call Walter, because a man named Walter gave it to us. And it will do a certain type of beeping. It'll go beep, beep, beep 3 times, and only 3 times. Doesn't make the sound like you would with a cop car or a radar gun. Just when an object is about to appear. And then within moments there'll be a sighting of an ET object. And their universe, their cosmos, and go partially into that. Because it's edifying. That's how you learn. You don't learn by having everything spoon-fed you at the level that you're already operating of it. Even though what I'm giving you is more of a deeper, right? Well, unless you're in a coma. And everyone can think. And so if you are sentient, if you have the ability to be aware and awake, you can become aware of awareness. And in that self-aware state, you can go into the silence of deep, quiet mind. And in that state, begin to remote view and see distant places, including where the ET craft are. And they may be under the ground underneath you. They may be transposed in the air around you. They may be on the far side of Saturn. It doesn't matter where they are, because there's no limitation in space when you go into thought consciousness that goes beyond space-time. Immediately went into this deep, deep, deep meditation, and I transcended into samadhi. And afterwards he was looking at me sort of appalled. He says, "You transcended, didn't you?" I said, "Isn't that what we were supposed to do?" And I didn't know that I was supposed to make this big gashrai about it, and make this big deal and have to waste 30 years doing something that you can do in 30 minutes. So that's another lesson. You need to sort of affirm to yourself, A, this can be done, and B, you can do it. Anything that's in the future can only be a probable future. If it's in the past, it's kind of in chrysalid. It's there. It's in the Akashic record. It's there. Man, I think they've been less than pleased with so far the response on balance that humans have had towards them. Because it's either been denial or fear or xenophobia or frank hostility. I mean, the Roswell event was actually an electromagnetic system going off that caused these two craft to hit each other and collide and crash. But it was an atomic bomb squadron, the only one. 2 craft that were going along. One sort of exploded right there northwest of Roswell. The other one descended and kind of cracked in half or broke up near Socorro. And that's where they got the ET that was alive out of it, what they called the EV. It is just practicality. You know, if you're in an what's called a hostile theater of operations, using military speak, which would be called Earth, that has space-based weapon systems that are all out there already deployed since 1965. I know guys who designed them. That when these objects fully materialize, will target them with an electromagnetic scalar weapon that goes faster than the speed of light. Believe me, they're not going to, it's not the 50s and 60s anymore where they just would materialize and land everywhere. Now, they do sometimes, but it's risky. So we have to operate with that understanding also. So there's another understanding I want to bring to this that people do not like hearing, but you know, I'm an emergency doctor. You come into my ER with a headache and I find a brain tumor, I'm not going to tell you got a migraine. And I say, you got a brain tumor. So here's the deal. We've developed systems that, unfortunately, are approaching parity transdimensionally with what some of these civilizations have in terms of technology, which means that we are a threat. And also means that, now, not that the intelligence community can't be everywhere at all places at all times, believe me. Unfortunately, when I'm around doing something like this, in all likelihood, it is monitored. But the mind and all the different ways that our experience can relate to ET manifestations. Now, there's something called, in the Vedic tradition, the siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S. These are different abilities and powers that people can develop as they develop higher consciousness. Now, these run the gamut of almost everything you've heard about, some of which has been relegated to mythology, but is actually very real, such as levitation, dematerialization, materialization, changes in your body density to move through solid objects, precognition, we've talked about, teleportation, telepathy, materialization of objects, etc., and so on and so forth. Now, those are all things that actually humans can do. Those are advanced applications of higher states of consciousness. But understand that there's a scientific correlation to every conscious city. So whatever that you can imagine that any enlightened master has done can be routinized or made routine through a scientific method, even when it, up to and including levels of the astral, you may call celestial, conscious cosmos, and do it scientifically. RCA radar system. And it was sweeping around, and they picked up a craft. And so the captain was called, came up, they got it. He called the command center, and they got it on radar. Unfortunately, they then hit it with some kind of electronic weapon or something. And the thing blew up. It kind of, there was an explosion in the sky, and it fell straight down into the water, this UFO. And the next morning, his ship was vectored into the point of impact. And they couldn't find the ship, but there was about a 6-foot square pod that had ejected, that had 4 of the ET beings in it. And this guy was a salt-of-the-earth Navy guy, and he said, well, they were handsome little men. Well, they had, their skin was the color of a Sicilian. I'll never forget him saying it. Sicilian. Okay. And bronze-colored, no hair, no pinna, which is the pinna is the flap, the monkey ears we have. They just have openings, fine lips, a sort of small nose, and just like the man that contacted me from Skunk Works at Lockheed about the astral projection experience, this person contacted me to find out something that had bugged him. It stuck in his mind and bothered him for 40 years. And I said, well, what is it? He says, well, we got him out of this thing, this pod, and they were ordered to put him in the ship's freezer till a submarine, nuclear submarine came along and took them, and they were all threatened with death that they talked about this. And he says these little men were in sort of these metallicized fabric. It was almost metal, soft metal like fabric, one-piece suits. I said, yeah, like a onesie. They didn't have any buttons or zippers. And he said, how could they have gotten in them? And I said, this is why you're calling me? And it was. This was exactly why he was calling me. And I said, well, I don't know if you're going to like my answer. And he said, well, tell me. I know those damn things, you could have to cut them off, but we couldn't even cut them. I said, well, the way that the suit is made, they just stand into an energy field that has a resonance, and it materializes around them. Like 3D printing, but like a 3D zip. So there are no, and it comes off the same way. It dematerializes off and materializes on. But I said, did you notice anything about this thing that they were in, that was floating? He said, yeah, it had no pieces. I said the same thing. So I call this sort of a infra-ultrasonic manufacturing, where if you imagine going beyond the speed of light, speed of electrons, beyond the 0-point energy field, and creating sort of a architectural blueprint of a spacecraft that's in that dimension, like an astral, like your astral body, and have that resonate, and it comes into this dimension in toto. So it recruits the atoms, the molecules, the structures, not by digging them up and smelting them and banging them and doing rivets like we do on an airplane, but it, and that's, I call this extraterrestrial manufacturing 101 that I'm sharing with you. Part of a craft that they got in Brazil, and I forget, it had magnesium and some other stuff in it, but the elements that were in it were so pure that even in the vacuum of space we could not manufacture it. And no one understood how they could be doing this. I said, because they're not going to some asteroid or planet and digging up stuff out of the earth and smelting it and melting it and then putting it together. They're creating a field, and it resonates and then comes in from that trans-dimensional virtual near astral, I call it, the near astral, and it then pops as a totality into 3D. Make sense? And there was an object. It looked like it was a crystalline jewel in the sky, and it was there for a number of minutes, and you couldn't even. It was painful. It was so beautiful. And then there was a fighter jet was vectored in, and the thing popped and began to go off. Looked exactly like a 737. These craft are imbued at the level of nanobiotechnology. You know what that is, nanobio? Where they're actually living and they're conscious. So the craft itself has the consciousness of the occupants, and often it's the chief pilot or the person who's actually directing it, which is usually, they will either touch it and think and they'll go. All right? But the craft itself is not just like a piece of machinery. It's actually living. And there have been more than one military guy I've interviewed who have been on retrieval missions when they get there, and the craft has been injured. I call it injured because it's organic, and there'll be a crack, and it'll be trying to heal. Like if you did a cut and did a time lapse of a healing of a wound on skin, it's doing this kind of thing, trying to fix itself. And so the craft themselves are nanobiotechnology at the level where they then can subsume or take on the awareness of the occupants. It's going. As you know from the film series, Donald Rumsfeld himself, no flaming liberal, he said there was $2.3 trillion unaccounted for in the Department of Defense budget. Now the estimates are on $8.5 trillion, 14 years later after 9/11. Trillion. So the bottom line is America, the United States of America, loses and can account for more money each year than the entire Eurozone and Great Britain together's military budgets. Well, let me answer your question with a question. What would you have done if you found that there was an illegal super secret, unacknowledged special access project, transnational, not international, transnational, transects geopolitical boundaries, that is sitting on the technologies that would give us a new civilization without poverty or pollution, that they have enforced the secrecy through murder, mayhem, lies, deception, and intimidation, up to and including high officials in governments, both governments, including your government. So the good people who are in your Ministry of Defense, intelligence community, politicians, etc. It's an extremely tightly compartmented operation. It's been very well funded. The other part to understand is nothing important of any strategic significance is above the surface of the earth. If it's above ground level, it's not really that important. It's fungible, replaceable. Everything critical is underground bases, all throughout the United States, Australia, Pine Gap, and also here. Reagan, who put all this effort into the SDI Star Wars initiative, which is really a cover story for putting platforms in space targeting interstellar vehicles, which is what we're doing. It really had nothing to do with brilliant pebbles. That was all just sort of a cover story. The real money was going into interstellar targeting and tracking of these ET craft and shooting them down, which we've been doing for a very long time. And they told him just enough information in a xenophobic way, in a way that was scary, to get his cooperation with that project. And that's why at the UN, if you Google it, you'll see that Reagan said, wouldn't our job of creating world unity and peace be easier if we had a common alien threat to unite against? 2 billion people living on late 19th century technologies, destroying the biosphere, the have and have-nots gap growing, which is a prescription for global revolution and terrorism, by the way, of course. And on top of it, you have a renegade group of unacknowledged special access projects who do not answer to your elected and appointed officials or to mine in America, doing as they please, up to and including targeting, tracking, and shooting down these interstellar vehicles, trying to provoke World War III. Of disinformation and automatic kook factor that gets associated with anything UFO and ET. And that's been done since the 1950s by the CIA, and it's been very effective. So a lot of people don't want to lose their respectability by touching the UFO issue. That's just true. I mean, it's a psychological warfare is the term used in the CIA document I have from 1950. It is not one particular, but a number of different species. And our purpose of our group is interstellar diplomacy and bringing all of them together. See, so what we would want to avoid is a bilateral, unilateral, but a bilateral or bipolar cosmos. And you want it to be multilateral. And you want it to be all civilizations, if they're capable of reaching this planet and in fact are here or near or in our solar system or have that capability, we would want to have humans who are on a team who are interested in dialogue, peace, and what I call universal peace. I mean, world peace is like the treaty of, the League of Nations is way too late for just world peace. Get into a certain level of very high voltage systems where the voltage is at a certain frequency and resonant field. And I'm not going to bore people with the arcana of this, but let's say you have a Poynting vector, or you put an energy field with very high voltage around an object that's a couple million volts with very, very low amperage. So there's not much power involved, but at a certain cycles per second, or hertz, resonant, and in specific resonant field, that object can be made to literally begin to resonate and then tilt out of linear space-time, and it will disappear. So, by humans. So it's disappeared, you can't see it, and it actually has moved into another dimension. Dimension 6, 10, 12, 80, 90, whatever it is. Someone asked me how many dimensions are there. I said, how many numbers are there between 0 and infinity? Which, of course, the outgrowth of that is the CE5 initiative, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, where humans use consciousness and thought to interface with interstellar communication systems and make contact. And that's the really exciting stuff in this. Well, it really gets into what Einstein called the spooky effect. Everybody know what spooky effect is? Well, Einstein observed that a particle could be in two places at once. Like that. The same thing. And so he couldn't really explain it, but he just called it spooky. The spooky. But it's not spooky when you think about it. The whole cosmos is actually non-local because it's conscious. That is that everything is conscious and everything can react to thought and consciousness. And so what he did at Princeton, he was professor emeritus of engineering, and some of his work has been continued by some of his students, is that he would have like a random number generator, like a machine that just generates, zeros and ones or something like that. And they'd have someone just sit, and it wasn't like this was some psychic or, somebody, just ordinary people, and they would put their intention on it that it would, instead of putting out zeros, would put out more ones. And sure enough, the bell curve distribution would shift. The mind is always omnipresent. Your mind, my mind, all mind, because there's a singularity of mind. Erwin Schrödinger, the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it's a singularity. You're just not limited to your physical body and self, even when you think you are. It's up in the high desert. Ben Rich, he wrote the book Skunk Works, and before he passed away, he's the one who said, well, he said several things. One thing he said, there are no private conversations anywhere on Earth. This was in the 90s, so he was way ahead of Edward Snowden. Number two, anything you can imagine, we've already done at the Skunk Works. And number three, we already have the technologies to travel amongst the stars. In fact, we can take E.T. home. And the last thing he did in his slide was to show this black disc going out into space, gravity disk, which they have, and which we have had since October 1954, when we mastered gravity control. So we haven't needed rockets, jets, cars, trains, buses, trucks, ships on the ocean, using combustible fuels, nuclear power, since October 1954. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Buying anti-gravity stuff, or electromagnetic gravitic, because that's the proper term. Anti-gravity is sort of a pop culture term. It's incorrect. It's not anti-gravity, it just creates a mass cancellation effect of an object so it floats. And if you cancel the mass enough, think about it. If you create a voltage around an object where the mass becomes less and less and less, what happens when the mass goes to zero? It disappears. Correct. It vanishes to the eye and all detection systems, and it's then moved into another dimension. And it's in that state that it goes from this star system to another one. Get it? Able to do it. So he lay down on his bed, and he was doing whatever technique they use. I've never taken that course, but he went out of his body, lifted up, and initially just kind of lifted up, and then he got so excited, he went right up through the roof, the ceiling of the house, and into the sky and into the atmosphere, and then slammed into the side of an extraterrestrial vehicle. Now he's fully lucid awake, and he said that the ETs on board, which were around 4 or 5 feet tall and very thin, no hair, were at some control, and they were observing. And they were hovering in the atmosphere, but not visible to the eye, because they were shifted into this other dimension. And when he hit the spacecraft, the craft moved, but it was not his physical body, it was his astral body, the body of light that you fly around in. He says, I don't understand how an interstellar vehicle, because he knew they existed, could be affected. I said, because it had shifted its resonant frequency beyond the crossing point of light, the speed of light and matter and electrons, into a dimension that is closely approximates the astral body field, that energy field that the mystics called astral. And since it was of a similar density to your own, it could interface with it. The funniest part of the story, after he said, oh, I've wondered my whole life how that could have happened. He popped inside and they looked at him like, my God, why don't you watch where you're going? You know, as I was, they did. It was kind of like appalled at this interstellar faux pas. And like, well, you watch where you're going. You know? But they did. They just kind of looked at him with this sort of like displeasure. There was an area called Dreamland. Is that when the pilots who were piloting these anti-gravity devices, and they were taking them to the edge of the crossing point of light, all right, right to the edge of going beyond the light barrier, resonantly. There is this phenomenon of beginning to dematerialize, and you find that you have shifted your body and the craft and everything in it, and it feels like a lucid dream, when you're awake in a lucid dream. And that's why it was called Dreamland.
Our own energy and our ability to create belief systems and perceptions that utilize the power that we're made of, rather than us thinking that it's not there, which is a part of what they're trying to do in dumbing us down. They can only dumb us down through our belief systems, you know, and all these particles are a part of it. But if we override the mental and mind control aspects of it, the particles don't have anything to really grab onto. I mean, the two really do work together. That's why, when you think about it, shows like Ripley's Believe It or Not, or people that can eat light bulbs, you know, and get away with it, they understand mind over matter. There's a lot of people that do. That's available for all of us. We have to know that everything's a metaphor that we're seeing. We're in this crazy lucid dream, and it doesn't look pretty. It's somewhat of a nightmare right now, but it's a shift that's on the inside. This whole shift time that we're in is an internal shift that creates an outer result. And once we get a grip on what we need to wake up to within ourselves, we're going to change everything outside of us. If we keep reacting and responding and getting angry and feeling constricted and assuming that, you know, they've got something on us, then that's exactly what is going to end up happening. And we're much greater than that. And this is all they want to keep us from knowing. The weather forecast, when we know what is kind of coming at us and we prepare, nothing can get in our way. So I use it, you know, astrology as a tool. It's not the end-all, be-all, and eventually we won't need it. It's kind of like to help us graduate from the wheel of necessity that we're sort of still in right now. But the thing is, when we can start to have good days on days where the astrological alignments are a nightmare, it means that we become, and I posted this, masters of disaster. And when we're true masters of the disasters, we don't even notice them as being disasters anymore, because we're rising and we're allowing it to push us into all that we are instead of tear us down. And the thing is, that concentration of energy that likes to, you know, cause us fear and constriction and pain and suffering is actually an opportunity to be pushed to the edge, to have an incredible breakthrough and to rise again. And so this is what we're dealing with right now, and it might end up making contact with, as a future human self, who is a divine, radiant light being that we could call an ascended master. But of course there's manipulated ascended masters that are archonic, that people channel and they get, you know, the wrong information, and that's another trap, is the New Age deceptions. So we have to see that everywhere we turn is either a trap or a potential deception or a problematic area, and that's why the only real place to turn is ourselves.
That case was military, made to look ET for the purpose of scattering the hell out of people. I said, really? He says, absolutely. And then I met with a man, it was accidental, you know, the universe works in strange ways. I'm sitting on a flight, flying, I think from Colorado or New Mexico to the East Coast, and the guy sitting beside me says, oh, I said, well, I'm a doctor. He said, well, what are you doing out here? I said, well, I actually do stuff with UFOs. He says, oh, you're kidding. He says, let me tell you. And he owned a 250,000 acre ranch in northern New Mexico. And he said, let me tell you what they're doing to my cattle. And he said, but it's not alien, it's humans. And he had night scopes. He was a very wealthy man. And he said, these guys are coming in there with special silent helicopters, and we have them. My military advisor was on a ship where one landed in a fog, and they couldn't see it. They said, where is it, where is it? They said, look up, it's right above you, and there's no sound. Completely quiet. He says, and we caught them red-handed doing these mutilations on my cattle. And he instituted a lawsuit against the U.S. government, but the group doing it was an unacknowledged group that's extra-constitutional, and the U.S. government said, we don't know anything about ETs. And by the way, there was an intelligence official who kept calling Stan Romanek, telling him when he had that creature come into his kitchen, and said, Stan is one of the fake ones. And he didn't know what it meant. I went out there with a MUFON investigator who investigates abductions. I said, yeah, it's a fake one. And he says, what do you mean? I said, I've been talking about this for 20 years. The literature is replete with the military involvement in these abductions. It's a fake one. It's man-made. It's made to look alien, to scare the hell out of people, but because it puts fear out in the community. I said, it's not extraterrestrial. It's man-made, alien. And that was because they were taking them to Dulce, which was near his ranch. Same thing at Pine Gap. I have a science physicist who worked at Pine Gap in Australia, and it's all subterranean, and he worked on projects. He says, we have these creatures coming off like sausages on a conveyor belt. You should be very concerned about paramilitary human. But the interstellars, not a problem. And I think you have to make a distinction. People say, well, how do you tell the difference? Well, an ET craft has no seams. The light from it is coming from refined materials that are so pure that the light itself looks like celestial. The beings themselves have a completely non-invasive, very intelligent, I mean, IQ of 400, 500, that range, and very conscious and spiritual. The PLFs are menacing, they're invasive. The man-made Lockheed Martin, Northrop, SAIC, man-made discs, saucers, triangles have rivets and seams. It's quite clear to tell the difference, but you need to know there is a difference.
And out and sort of bounce around the sky seem to be the UFOs. Of course, what I've heard is the percentages is 80% are piloted by ETs and 20% are military
craft. How can you tell the distinction?
I think the UFOs that are extraterrestrial are the ones that are blipping around because they're capable of jumping into other dimensions and coming back in. And I don't think that the humans or the military that are piloting those crafts quite have that ability. I mean, because the advanced extraterrestrials, the UFOs are part of their body. I mean, their DNA is connected to the craft. The back-engineered UFOs, just that we might connect with, like maybe the Greys, they're not really like the higher extraterrestrial energies. And I'm not saying all Greys are like this, but you know, when you're dealing with something that's part of the collaborations of ET government, that's much closer to the physical in order to make real contact and do abductions, really started to tell me a lot more. And it had to do with going to Mars in 2012. And we'd be taking these crafts called ARCs, spelled A-R-C, and he was working with this group of people that had code names, finding bits and pieces where I would see a name association with some of those things, even weather modification and all sorts of stuff, that they have a link to that. I discovered that they are actually a part of MJ12. MJ12 is the council that has all the alien technology. And so what this means now, but first off, when I tried to get away from it all, it's almost too long of a story to talk about the struggle that it took to get myself out of it all. I mean, it just got really chaotic. I was being blasted with all sorts of stuff, and the mind control stuff doesn't work on me, and they knew that. That's why they brought in that person to reel me in. And I discovered that they had used quantum access technologies called looking glass technologies to locate us in a past life so that they could pull in somebody that I already had a natural affinity to so that I would have an attraction, so I'd have more like a familiarity. And because if it was just anybody, I wouldn't probably, be that drawn into it. Particles from chemtrails get into our bodies, and they're trying to, plug us into the artificial intelligence systems. We have to be very careful of government disclosure, and also where they have all these scientific breakthroughs and all these technologies that are introduced to heal the environment. We have to make sure it's not the beings that destroy the environment coming in as the saviors, like the leaders of our country do when they're fighting the war on foot all the time, And when I do readings for people, I sort of help them to wake up to who they are, because if you know who you are and you're authentic, you can't be controlled. When we fall into the programming and the expectations of society, or we give our power away when we're going through a powerful initiation, or we buy everything that we read in the news and see on TV, then yeah, you're susceptible to mind control. And then of course there's people that were born into projects that were going through the trauma-based mind control at a young age, and I was never put into those projects. It wasn't until 2006 that this whole sort of shadow government stuff showed up. Even though Eisenhower was aware of all of it, I didn't experience the depths of what his warning was about until I was presented with all of this. And that's when I started to understand the deeper projects like MK Ultra and the Monarch programs, and how they, you know, have sex slaves and have trained assassins, and they use humans to do their dirty work. And it's the most criminal thing that it's so hard to fathom. I still wake up every morning in shock. I can't even believe that anybody would do this to.
Trading in the workshop that can tell us maybe where our star family, who our star family is, where we came from, because most of us have not actually, you know, originated and evolved on this earth forever. We came to this planet at some point from somewhere else. And by getting to know these different star species and to getting to know these parts of ourselves, we become more deeply empowered to make contact with our star family. And so I'm hoping that we get tuned in to our different star families, and then we'll go out at night and we'll call in some ships. Nice. And we'll actually hang out with those star families. And it's a profoundly deeper experience making contact and seeing a starship and having a telepathic contact with star beings when you feel and have the capacity to know how deeply that species actually is your family. Yeah. They're not foreign, they're not these others, they're actually your family, and it's a reunion.
Actually, but focus on our consciousness, because consciousness trumps everything. Disease, bloodlines, your past history, whatever your karma. In a free will universe started off with the masculine and feminine as one. And that union within us is going to help us to upgrade our DNA. And making subtle improvements in how we carry energy, the words we speak, because we're free energy technologies. Everything that we say and do creates our reality. Everything we believe. And so our belief systems and the things that we express determine which timeline we're on. We can be very compromised, but if we're committed and devoted to the ascension timeline, nothing's going to keep us from it. And that's why there's no need to fear. But it might mean that you have to go through a detox. It might mean you have to unplug a little and pay attention to where you've been manipulated.
He who questions training only trains himself at asking questions. When you doubt your powers, you give power to your...
The altars that we see with the super soldiers and people that have gone through trauma-based mind control. And you can be in an altar and have no idea that there's a whole bunch of other personalities that are hanging with you. And that's why we get so much sincerity. That's why people thought Bill Clinton, hey, he seems like a great guy, and wow, Obama, you know, and we feel it, and we feel their sincerity. And that's where the trick is, because once they trigger a different altar, you're dealing with a completely different person who's going to take us somewhere completely different. We're also dealing with cloning technologies, which is a really difficult one to wrap our heads around, where they could take the original being, take him somewhere, and put a clone in and operate through that clone. They are able to download memories so that the person is functioning like they're that other person. There's a lot of movies out there. I mean, the whole sci-fi world has so much to...
I know exactly who made me. A bunch of guys in lab coats, like, figured out the genetic chain that they wanted to make and, like, put it all together and was like, ta-da! So I don't have to wonder where I came from. This was not a fast vehicle. It was more like not much more than a floating tank. So it could hover above the battlefield and, you know, people could send radio reports back about whatever was happening, but it was not a fast vehicle. And it had what appeared to be from the photographs, about an 18-millimeter anti-aircraft gun mounted underneath that could defend itself. But again, this is not really an attack vehicle. It was really designed for intelligence and observation more than anything else, and as a test run. The vehicles that came later, the Vril 1 and the Vril 2, were a bit more sophisticated. We presume that the Vril 2 did have an out-of-atmosphere capability, that it had a space traveling capability. We don't know exactly how many 100,000 miles they got above the atmosphere, but they definitely got out and came back before anybody. So the Nazi space program was the very first space program in the 20th century We can't count that as the first space program on Earth. We know that a matter of record, Admiral Byrd went down, and that what was supposed to be a 6-month mission ended up being about a 3-week mission. They got the snot kicked out of them. Admiral Byrd is quoted in a Chilean newspaper on the way back out saying, yeah, we had to return because of heavy casualties. And sort of the famous quote is, I don't want to alarm anyone, but the next global conflict will be fought with vehicles that can travel pole to pole at extreme speed. That's his quote. I did spend 17 years in the MDF, which is the Mars Defense Force. Yeah, there's the Mars Defense Force. There's colonies. They've been there since the 70s. There's other sort of evidence of that. There's an interesting video that does float around of the first drone that they landed on Mars in 1963 or something like that. It was a cooperative American, at that time, Soviet project. And I think the first time that it was brought to the public was in the Alternative 3 show that was then later, oh, no, we didn't really mean it. There's been quite a bit going on there for quite some time. And then sort of the plan was, we're going to have this atomic nuclear war, Cold War mentality. If those of you who are old enough to really remember Cold War mentality. And growing up in years of the Cold War, when we were really touched down on the moon the first time in either late 1947 or early 1948. I know you're going, what? That math doesn't add up. Well, you're doing the wrong math. So let me explain how that math works. Quantum dilation is this experience of where you get to add time to your personal experience, and you do this through time travel, which we've also had since, the late 50s and 60s. They're taking a shot of it above, and so this picture has gone around a number of internal military documents and pamphlets for people going, look at our new Galactic Freedom Class, TR-3B, and so... right, okay, this is one of the new fighter craft that we have that is what we call it's a hybrid fighter which has orbital capability, so this can fly into orbit, this can fly into space. Okay? And thinking that the entire planet is hollow when it tanked. Okay? Not at all. Honeycombed, first 10 miles, and then lots of hot magma, lots of solid stuff, nickel core, solid, hot, under pressure. Don't go there. It's not going to be fun. You're not going to like it. Okay? Nobody can live there. It's way too hot, way too much pressure. Except the crab people. There's no crab people. I'm kidding. You can't fly over the South Pole. You're not allowed. Planes are not allowed to fly over the South Pole, so you can't see that. If you wanted to fly over the South Pole and say, I want to fly over the South Pole, you're not allowed. This is a little blurry, but this is 3 guys in suits on Mars pointing out at some stuff. And I know you can't see that too well, and it could just be someplace here on Earth. You understand that, because believe it or not, they look pretty similar. A photograph that was taken of the Milky Way galaxy from outside the Milky Way galaxy by one of our Naval Space Command ships. That is an Arcturus, another one of our sort of experimental disc craft that we built. That is a United States, that is like a United States Naval Space Command ship that was built by us. Cool, right? I mean, this looks pretty modern. Now, what I have to understand, this is a drone. This is not an actual piloted fighter. This is a drone fighter. This is, again, a hybrid vehicle. But what I'm also to understand is that this is one of the new test vehicles, test drones, which is actually run by an artificial intelligent computer that's a biological brain connected up to an electronic computing system. So it's a hybrid of an electronic computer and a biological brain that makes an artificially intelligent drone controlling piloting system. Now, interestingly enough, and it's sort of outlining these. I wish I can't quite read that, but just sort of outlining the sort of areas, the Norma arm, and the Kilo Arsic ring, and I mean, it's all diagrammed. But what we have that is of note is it tells us where we are right here, but it also has these yellow markers on it. Now, this is interesting. There's a little star here, there's a little star here, there's a little circle here, and there's a little cross here. So these mean something different, right? Okay, each one of these is a different symbol identifying what exactly these locations are. But what I can tell you is that on these maps, if it's in yellow,
that means that we have a base there. We either have a base or an embassy or a presence in these locations. What's that? Hey, you might be able to find this online, I'm not sure. I mean, I know the person that gave me this and dumped this likes to spread their stuff all over the internet. Former NASA employee, former disgruntled NASA employee with an axe to grind. Oh, fire me, will you? I left a back door in and I'm going to spread your pictures all over the internet. Longitude, latitude, midway out, south polar region below cap. Oh, I touched it too hard, I'm sorry. I touched it, don't touch it. Don't go anywhere. It says it's the fourth of 5 images at 107% resolution. And you'll note down here at the bottom, if you can read it, it says bio-life immediately below third image, left panel, works downward in right panel. So that's kind of telling you where to look. And I'm going to admit that looking at this is hard to actually identify because this is taken in an infrared picture, exactly what they're talking about. And in this picture, what the biological life is other than trees. These are trees. Some of the next pictures are a little bit better and define these better. These sort of look deciduous to me, like oak or elm trees or something. There's another picture that shows pretty distinctive pine. Gotta have rain for trees, people, right? So there's more than running water. There's atmospheric weather, water, rain, snow, stuff that maintains this life, that can maintain us, their breathing, etc., etc. I'm not saying it doesn't get really cold in places, and I'm not saying you want to hang outside at night, but it is breathable. We can live there. We don't need spacesuits to walk the surface of Mars. Space Command's logo, again, they've had to admit recently that there is one. They just, don't acknowledge how big Naval Space Command is. But those of you who know a little bit about Air Force Space Command, some people would like to think that Air Force Space Command is really like Space Command. I like to refer to them as the Sanford and Son of the space program. They get to watch the space garbage, right? That's their main job. And the Air Force Space Command is to watch the garbage, pay attention to where the debris is going. They get to boldly sit where no man sat before. And the Navy, in fact, gets to actually run the ships. Again, because when it comes right down to it, do you want a bunch of Air Force guys running your ships, or do you want Navy guys doing it? That is another sort of infrared image of the Milky Way galaxy taken from outside the galaxy. So again, a lot of the reason why you're seeing this contrast in colors is because it's taken in sort of infrared image, so it's showing the heat signature of the galaxy from the side, from a ship that we flew outside. Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Somewhere in the old Soviet Union, couldn't tell you where. This would be one of the first alien reproduction vehicles from Project Aurora. So as you can see, it says U.S.A., U.S. Air Force, it's an experimental aircraft. It's got the disc shape because it's using the sort of magneto-electrogravitics of these disc-shaped craft. But, we weren't really sure what else to do, so we basically took an airplane cockpit, control system and stuck it on top of a disc craft and said, that's our first alien reproduction vehicle. She's pretty. Right? She looks kind of human, but not. The ear's kind of a giveaway, right? She's got something different going on in her pupils there too, her eyes. That's a little different. Yeah, she's kind of pretty. And as some other women pointed out when I was showing this picture, she's got makeup on. Yeah. Now, as a dude, I just see pretty face. I don't necessarily think that she had to do all this makeup, but then I was like, oh yeah, she does. She does makeup there. Okay. So that's an interesting question. Did we get makeup from aliens, or did they get it from us? Like Jupiter. There's an intergalactic space station that orbits around Jupiter. In case you didn't know that. The reason it orbits around Jupiter is for people coming from the outside of our solar system to here, if you tell them, no, there's an intergalactic space station in the solar system. Well, where is it? Big dead gas giant, can't miss it, right? So, right? It's the biggest object in the solar system, so having an intergalactic space station orbiting Jupiter is because it's the easiest thing, which is where most of these meetings take place. which our personnel, many different extraterrestrial species and personnel come to this intergalactic space station to negotiate contracts, to have, meetings to, all kinds of sort shit out. We got a business deal, a trade deal, we got to sort some contract out, you want this, we want this, contracts. I also say this to divert something. The number one thing that everyone out there wants to do is trade stuff. Okay, so trade is the fundamental basis of intergalactic life, here, just in case. But I can tell you, having sat at that table a number of times with a number of different species, that you have this wide variation in possibility. Okay? But you do have a lot of people who look really similar to us. And you have just as many people that look completely different to us. You have a scale of size, right? I think the smallest person species I ever saw come in from meeting about 18 inches high. It's kind of tiny. The largest person I ever saw in this room was probably no more than about 45 feet tall. This is a room with a ceiling over 60 feet high that is over 100 meters end to end. And it looks, I don't know if it's actually glass, but it has windows that go all the way around 360 degrees. So you have this massive observation deck that looks out to Jupiter into space, and that everyone can have these lovely views and have this pretty view. A large tank of water with people in one side of a table and people on another side of the table not in water having a conversation. For thousands of years, why do anything different? But we have this amazing interaction that's mostly peaceful, that's mostly conversation, that's mostly trade, that's mostly people, a wide variety of differences getting together to understand commonality, which is you have something I need, I have something you need. Let's get together and talk about how we mutually benefit each other by me getting you what you need and you. But I'm telling you, those few agitators can ruin your whole day, okay? Right? Agitators with spaceships and death rays are serious. You either have to match that with your own spaceships and your own death rays, or, it's War of the Worlds all over your end. And it's not a happy story because, we get stomped on. It's a happy story when we can fight back. A lot of procedure for that. So we don't just shoot people out of the sky for no reason. We give people fair warnings, let them know that they can't be here if they can't be here. People who have come here and are staying here, we have to let them know you have to go. If they don't want to leave, we'll continue to let them know they have to go. And if they continue to not leave, then we'll continue to let them know that they have to go. And eventually down the road, we'll evict them. So we used to have a zeta problem. The zeta reticulans, also known as the small whites. People call them grays, except they're not gray. They're white. So people inside the military-industrial complex, we don't call them grays ever. Sometimes they used to be referred to as small whites as opposed to the tall whites. But that was old school. Once we really started to understand that they were a group, where they were from, and that there were factions of them, we had to start identifying them by a more specific name. So we have the Zeta A's and the Zeta B's, and then we have the Zeta A1s, and the Zeta A2s, and the Zeta A3s, and the Zeta B1s, and the Zeta B2s, and the Zeta B3s, and the Zeta B4s. 7 distinct factionalizations of a single species. In fact, that's what happened. We picked the wrong friend. Okay? And so when they first arrived and made a deal, we took the deal. It was a bad deal. We found out a few years later it was a bad deal, and we had made the wrong friend. Decades later, as we developed this massive space fleet, we finally get the ability to tell them, and over time we continue to have these conversations. We know we said that was okay, but we've changed our mind. It's not okay. You need to stop the abductions. You need to stop picking people out of their beds at night. You need to stop doing whatever tinkering program you're doing. We've learned enough about what you're doing. We don't like it, and we're telling you that you need to stop. Well, we have a contract. Yes, you do, but we disagree now with the terms of that contract. And so thus ends a contract dispute. Decades long. Right? And we tell them no, and they keep saying we have contract. When we finally develop enough muscle to get rid of them, we finally say, okay, now you gotta go. And we evict them from planet Earth. And then they have one forward operating base on Ganymede at this time. And we tell them, we gotta go. We blockade Ganymede, they can't come or go, you gotta go. Still they're not going to leave. After about 5 years of, you gotta leave, no, we're not leaving. Yes, you have to leave, no, we're not leaving. Yes, you have to leave, no, we're not leaving. We finally issued them an eviction notice, and we kicked their ass and blew their ass off that rock. Okay? So we no longer have Zetas that continue to be teleoperated by other people, including our military personnel. The technology that the Zetas used. Not a single Zeta Reticulan physically stepped foot on planet Earth ever. They would die. But they can teleoperate a clone drone that you wouldn't know the difference of. You'd think that was an alien. You wouldn't realize that it's a biological drone being teleoperated from someone on the ship. It's gone from, what am I going to do? To, I said go. And if you don't go, all right, I got a fleet of guys with death-raising particle beams and, we'll pay for it. So I think we're going to take a break. But, some other unit might have impacts. We don't have impacts. We have psionic specialists. So, but essentially it's the same thing. These are people who are learning from a sort of same pool of techniques and tools based on the same laws of understanding. First law of psionics is that all thought produces psionic energy, where thought is the cause and psionic energy is the effect, where P equals psionic energy in science per second. Psionic energy is measured in science per second. You have to have a psiometer for that. You know what a psiometer is? No, you don't. So I haven't built one yet. So as soon as I get to build a psiometer, believe me, this is not hard. The fun thing about psionic technology and sort of psionic physics in a laboratory, that we talked a bit about that, is that it's not rocket surgery at all. And so as far as really building and sort of equipment to register and read psions, to build a psiometer, and then to build psionic amplifiers, which magnify psionic energy and start to do really, really interesting things so that you can actually manipulate physical objects. And probably the easiest thing to build then is a psionophone, which is essentially an apparatus that magnifies your psionic energy and allows you to communicate psionically or telepathically with another human being, with another thing over their head. Basically, if you've ever seen those hair dryers at the salon, like you sit in the thing, you're going to sit in this chair, this thing's going to come down over your head, and it's going to spin around, and then that's going to amplify your psionic energy so that you can actually communicate to another person who has sufficient psionic energy or is also in an amplifier. In the rest of the universe, you have many species who are actual fully psionic species. Doesn't mean they don't talk to each other with their mouths, but it means that they fully have an ability to mentally communicate and feel and sense one another. And one of the first coolest things of why we want to get to that is because one of the first benefits of having a psionic culture is people can't lie to each other anymore. In charge of what areas, it's complicated. Let me actually say one more thing about that. Who actually is in charge is still the people in this country, because we still have a democratic republic. Yes, 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 yes. Let me tell you what the problem is. When you have voter participation rates in the 20 percentiles and the 30 percentiles, that's when democracy doesn't work. When you have voter participation in the 70 percentiles and the 80 percentiles, democracy works. You don't think you like the candidates now? There would be a different choice of candidates if more people participated. The illusion that you don't think that it would matter is because you don't understand the demographics. We know the demographics. We know the numbers. It's not 49-49 with 2% in the middle. It is a solid 3/4 of the demographic population of the United States of America that wants 9 out of the 10 important socially political issues of the day one way over the other. 3/4 of the population wants fair taxation for billionaires. 3/4 of the population wants Wall Street crooks to pay and go to prison. 3/4. It's not 49-49. But the problem is, a certain group of people have you convinced that your vote doesn't matter. It matters. Other species in the galaxy have functional governments. They have functional systems. They have functional democratic republics. They have functional organized government where people participate. Okay? It can work. Except we don't teleport, like we don't reorganize people's molecules. That tends to go wrongly. Okay, that really is a very advanced technology, and species that can do that, it's very advanced. You know, we create portals and jump gates and put people through it, and that's what we call teleporting. So we definitely have that technology, but that's the only thing that I would say that we haven't been able to duplicate or do that's like Star Trek level technology, all that other stuff we can do. Now, I haven't had food out of the replicators, but I've heard that they don't necessarily, they're not real good yet. They're kind of like 4 different kinds of flavored paste.
Pot roast.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had it, so I don't know. We actually, like I said, we had cafeteria food, we had like kitchens.
So you had a mess hall on your ship? Or?
Well, on Mars and the MDF we did, and on the ship as well. Yeah, we had like regular, you know, galley mess hall.
Really? So that was a big ship.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah, the Nautilus is probably like a mile long.
Wow.
It's big. It's really big.
And did you have other craft in there that were you like a mothership with other?
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, we had I think 10 fighter squadrons, 10 air wings actually. Which let's see, 10 air wings, 4 squadrons per air wing, so that's like 40 squadrons. Wow. I mean, so it was a lot.
You had a ship a mile long going 80K.
Oh, no. The Nautilus could go much faster.
Whoa.
Yeah, it also had the ability to create jump gates. So it could create jump gates for us to go to jump somewhere, or it could create jump gates for itself and travel faster depending on where it needed to go. But it could go way faster than that. I couldn't tell you that's classified. I mean, that's beyond my pay grade to know what its top speed was, but I know that it was faster than that.
Okay, Earthlings have a galactic presence.
Absolutely anymore. And we have all these insane, cheap oil price things that are coming on. But we're seeing also these amazing alternative energy projects. The Canadian company that's building a saltwater generator that essentially runs, so it's a little portable generator that runs on saltwater. They've got the prototype is coming out. They're doing demonstrations. They're getting their whole industrial, sort of production protocol thing going. They've really been sort of having to delay the process for a number of reasons, but they've kind of been on top of this one, and it's going to happen. So we're getting there. We have an automobile produced by a European auto company that has a saltwater engine and runs on saltwater. Okay. About Nibiru, Marduk, if we're talking about that 12th planet. According to Sitchin's math, it's out at its apogee. Okay. So it's about at its farthest point away from it. We should not see it for another 1,300, whatever, 1,500 years. It's going to be a while. So it's not coming anytime soon. There are other very large objects that have been reported coming in and out of the solar system. Planet-sized objects, but not displaying a gravitational pull, so not having a solid mass, possibly being sort of out of phase energy consciousness objects, possibly living things floating through space the size of planets. Right? Blowing my mind. It blows my mind when I hear about that. I'm like, what?
The other question I had is, have you ever been to Venus?
No, never been. Never been. My understanding is that that's a dimensional frequency issue as well. Like their civilized world exists in sort of 4th dimensional density. So yeah, there's like methane and ammonia and stuff if we go there in our bodies. But yeah, if you can elevate your frequency, you have a ship that can, shift, go up that level that I imagine and I understand it's quite lovely.
They're giants, they got long red beards, they're well preserved, and they apparently have been in stasis for quite a number of years now. They're waiting for some kind of event here on Earth, and they're going to wake up. And some of them have already been awakened, and apparently have been taken off the planet. But these have been discovered all over the world. These chambers, they're called stasis chambers.
Okay, so
and these are tall beings.
Right, so when they discovered the tomb of Osiris, they discovered the tomb of Osiris. For those of you who don't know. And that's not a secret at all. In fact, Dr. Zahi Hawass
who I really affectionately call him the Grand Poobah of Egyptology, because over time, his job, he's had that job forever, but over time they have changed his title. And every time they change his title, they add more words. And so, and so it's something like, it is something like head of Egyptian antiquities, and I mean, it's this, you know, in Egypt, I mean, it's like 6 or 7 words long, and I mean, they just keep making his title bigger and bigger, but it's the same job. And so I lovingly and affectionately call him the Grand Poobah of Egyptology. But, and there are some people have accused him of stealing antiquities and stuff. I don't think that's the case. I think the programs that they're doing to get at some of that stuff is not stealing them. They're classified, so it's not stealing. I don't know what else to say about that, but I'm not sure to say that that's properly to blame him for that. But from everything that I have seen of him and of his presence, he is so ecstatic to want to talk about Egyptology. He is so ecstatic to want to share this stuff with people. And he's rolled out the discovery of the tomb of Osiris like 3 different times now. And the second time rolled it out with like actually a fake tomb because it made it more interesting. There's like a raised dais with a sarcophagus on it, and then like a moat, it's like lit up, and all these little obelisks around it, which is not like the original chamber, which is much more plain and the square room. But, right? I know, right? So it's totally a stage setup, but it's not a lie, because they did find the original tomb. There's this whole original event that they did, and they had it on television and everything. And then, but like everyone went, so? Like nobody got like the importance of, do you not understand that this is the first time that they have found a tomb of a god, a deity of the pantheon, like found that, like that's never happened. Kind of important, kind of significant. We might learn something here. I mean, that's a big deal. And for people to just go, so, tomb of Osiris, right? Not just any god, the head, the concho, right, of the pantheon, like the head guy, the CEO of the board, like that guy, and everyone's just like, so he does this rollout, no one seems to pay attention. Over time, he, you know, builds this kind of setup and like, tries to like, come on, everybody, and it's still like, you know, people just don't seem to like, have as much of an interest, but he's tried to roll out this discovery several times to talk about it, like get people to have this discussion about it. But there is this very interesting story about how right after this happened, they discovered the tomb in about 1987. I happened to be visiting friends, and I ended up sort of like stayed in Colorado Springs for about 6 months, and Drunvalo Melchizedek came through town and gave a talk to a room full of people at the Colorado Convention Center, to a room full of people, and was very excited because he knew people that knew Dr. Hollis and had an associate there, and was very excited to tell everybody about the discovery of the tomb of Osiris. And then, oh no, this is all coming out, but he kind of blew the whistle too early. And so a week later, someone asked him about it in an interview, and he backpedaled, no, that's not what I said at all. People misunderstood me. And it was about a year to the day that I had come home from my job later at the time, and they were having the program, and Dr. Hollis was on television announcing the discovery of the tomb. So they waited about a year after the discovery to officially announce it. But Drunvalo was also excited. No, they're going to announce it next week. So he went ahead and just blew the whistle to the whole group and told us the story, but had to backpedal because apparently I told too soon. So, but it was, I felt really fortunate to be in that room of about 400 people who heard that story, because everyone else got the backpedal version and we all got to hear the story, which was pretty cool. But part of the story is that when they they find this chamber that has a hole, you know, a doorway, a trap door in the corner, a shaft that goes down 20 or 30 feet to another chamber, another shaft that goes down 30 feet to another chamber, to another shaft, to another chamber, down about like 3 separate chambers going down over like 90 or 100 feet, so from top to bottom. And when they get down to the bottom, they find a sarcophagus that's about 5 tons. The lid was like 2.5 tons. The lid is now in the Cairo Museum.
And now, according to the story that Drunvalo told, that this assistant of Dr. Fowler's told him, when they pulled off the sarcophagus lid, there was in fact a body, not a mummy, a body that was in stasis. There, see, I went all around full circle. So we heard that story back in 1997, and then that there was in fact the tomb of Osiris. So hearing someone talking about, okay, that sounds like we're in. They found them in Ohio. Sounds like we're hearing a theme here.
Conflicts in which we are concerned about mantid or insect species territorially competing for territory on Earth. The ones that I understand that are here completely based on treaties that everyone's okay with and are not here to do harmful or negative things. Of all of the ET species that we have over the last 70 years, they made treaties with and let them come and hang out, that's not necessarily the case. Of some of those, we've had to learn that those are bad relationships, and we've had to, break them up and break off with them, and in some cases, kick them out of the neighborhood and tell them, out, don't come back. It's very complicated, and because you have factions within factions who have different agendas going, both opposite directions on the fork of the road of sort of, do we move towards golden civilization or total fascist civilization? Because that's the tug of war. People don't understand the tug of war. We're either tug of war for golden civilization, fascism, or it's all going to break and collapse into barbarism. That's essentially the sort of tug of war that's happening because of all these different interests. And we really have the choice of trying to understand those forces and direct it back towards golden civilization, where we shore up the things of civilization that are crumbling and falling apart, and we eliminate poverty, and we eliminate the reason for people to have to be using large amounts of bombs and chemical weapons on each other, and we make law enforcement officers accountable for killing people for committing misdemeanors or just standing, leaning against a toy. There are things that have to be made accountable and fixable in order to move in that direction. But a lot of what I think is being directed by that are...
Well, guess I better be going.